Hello everybody, and welcome to another War of the Spark set review. Today we are going to be talking about the black cards. But before I dive into it, I do want to remind you that if you enjoy the video, be sure to hit that thumbs up button. It really does help me out a ton, and if this video gets to 50 thumbs up, 50, I guarantee that I will be making a future installment of my War of the Spark set review covering a different color. So if you want to see those, be sure to hit that thumbs up button. If you have any questions at all about any of the cards I talk about in this video, be sure to let me know by leaving a comment in the comment section down below, and I will gladly respond with my thoughts or answers. And finally, if you do enjoy this video, be sure to hit the subscribe button on your screen. It really does help me out a ton, and it will give you updates whenever I post future content, including future set reviews and War of the Spark draft videos. So without further ado, let's jump into the set review. Today we are going to be talking about black. But before I get into the card by card, I do want to mention my grading scale very briefly. I do want to mention that I do not think the grading scales are super important because picks are so many times contextual. You just want to be choosing the best possible card in each scenario. You're never going to have to choose from a list of all of these cards. That being said, people do love a good grading scale, so I'm going to go through mine. Fives are incredible cards. They are the best of the best cards that just win you the game on their own or are just incredibly powerful. Fours are the strong cards, the cards that make you actively want to play those colors. So a lot of the time, if you have a couple fours, you'll just naturally move into that color combination. Threes are the strong playables, like the solid playables, average cards. These are the cards that they're in your deck, and you're like, well, I'm fine with this card being in my deck. Twos are a little bit below average, but they make it into your deck quite frequently, or from time to time, depending on the type of card. Sometimes you'll play them begrudgingly, and then 2.5s are somewhere in the middle. You'll play them and it'll be fine. And then ones are just straight up unplayable. So with that in mind, let's talk about the black cards. And black is a very strong color in this set. The commons are just unbelievable compared to some of the other colors that I have already reviewed. Starting off, we have but I'll get to those when I mention those. Starting off, we have Aid the Fallen. This card is going to be more powerful if you have Planeswalkers, because obviously you want to be drawing 2 cards instead of 1 card with your spell. And in the late game, this could potentially draw you 2 cards. Black has a couple of uncommon Planeswalkers in it. You're probably going to end up with and that are pretty reasonable. You're probably going to end up with some Planeswalkers in your deck. And if you have 2 Planeswalkers in your deck that are relatively strong, Aid the Fallen gets a little bit better. But I think you generally want to be playing this if you have 2 or 3 Planeswalkers and not playing it otherwise. So I'm going to start this off at a 2. But ratchet it up half a point for every Planeswalker you get. So if you have 1 Planeswalker, this card's probably a 2. If you have a second Planeswalker, this card's probably a 2.5. And yeah, if you have no Planeswalkers, it's pretty much unplayable. I'll start it off like that. Banehound, I think, is unplayable. People love playing 1-drops, but tacking a bunch of abilities onto your 1-drops does not necessarily make them better. Lifelink and haste on a 1-drop doesn't really mean much. This card just dies essentially dies as soon as your opponent plays a 2/2. There are a lot of 2/2s in limited, and Banehound is not a card you want to be putting in your deck. It's definitely a 1-point card, not a great option for you. Next up, we have Charity Extractor, which is a card that I'm not a huge fan of. 1/5s for 4 is just understated, and giving lifelink to a 1-powered creature just doesn't do much. So I'm going to start off with Charity Extractor being a 1-point card, maybe a 1.5. If you can put a counter on it, does get kind of annoying because a 2/6 is really hard to get through, but generally I think this card is going to be unplayable, and you should treat it as such. Next up, we have Davriel's Shadowfuge. You may be thinking, why do all of the black commons suck? I thought you said the black commons were good, but we're going to be getting to those later. Davriel's Shadowfuge, I think it's Fugue, in case you didn't get that from what I was saying, also kind of sucks. 4 mana to make a player discard 2 cards is just too inefficient for limited. Mind Rot is already borderline playable, and that costs 3 mana. Making them lose 2 extra life is generally not going to make the card that much better. So Davriel's Shadowfuge, not a card that I am a huge fan of. So I think that card's unplayable as well, just a 1.0. Duskmantle Operative, pretty good card. I think this card's just going to be a solid 2.5. A lot of the time it's just going to be a vanilla 2 for 2, so that means it's not going to be a great, a solid, a good average playable. It's going to be a little bit below average or what you want in your deck. But 2 mana 2/2 that can't be blocked by some big things could be pretty relevant. So going to give this card a 2.5. Not much to talk about here. But definitely a card to keep in mind. Herald of the Dreadhorde, not a huge fan of this card. I think this card's a 2. 4 mana 3/2 is just too small. It trades off with 2-drops, and that's not what you want your 4-drop to be doing. I generally don't value Amass incredibly highly. It's just because if your creature died, if your 4-drop died into a 2/2, it'd be one thing. But if it dies and just puts some counters onto your already big creature, I think that Amass is just so tricky to evaluate, because the cards, if they just made creatures on their own, would be so much better than just stacking up onto one big creature, because then if that one creature just gets killed or gets bounced or gets tapped for a turn or something like that, it's just a catastrophe for you because you put all your eggs in this one basket. So I'm generally not a huge fan of just loading up all the amass tokens, and I think Herald of the Dread Horde is just a little bit too inefficient, though it's still playable, so I think it's just going to be a 2.0 card. Not a great thing. Kaya's Ghost Form is a card that's really tricky to evaluate. I'm not a huge fan because cards like this in the past have been like okay but not great. It makes me think of this card from Dominaria. I can't think of the name right now, but it did a similar thing, but it returned the card to your hand. This is obviously better because it brings it right back into play. And the fact that you can put it on a Planeswalker might mean that it's a little bit better. You can put it on your low loyalty Planeswalker to ensure it sticks around. You can put it on, but that doesn't really seem that great because then your opponent just won't attack the Planeswalker. If you put it on a creature, you can bring back the creature, but like what type of creature do you put this on? And then there is some removal that spells that exile in this set, so generally not a huge fan of the Kaya's Ghost Form. I think it'll probably end up being playable, but generally not a card you're going to be happy to put in your deck a lot of the time. I think it's going to be a 2-point card, maybe a 1.5, not a super powerful card. It seems more powerful than it is, so I think it will be overplayed probably. I guess it works on exile, so exile removal doesn't matter. But yeah, returning the creatures to the battlefield it doesn't strike me as a very good effect for 1 mana, because if you don't have a creature, it does nothing, and you kind of need a good creature. You can't just put this on a random 3-drop and have it be good. So, not a huge fan of Kaya's Ghost Form. I think it's going to be a 2, maybe a 2.5, now that I realize the exile clause is there. We all learned new things during the set review, I guess. Lasso Tepa Behemoth. I love the flavor text on this card. That's really all there is on this card, but a 5 mana 5/4, not a horrible card. I'm going to give this card a 2.5 rating. 5 mana 5/5 is about where you want to be for a 5 mana vanilla creature, but a 5 mana 5/4 will make the cut some amount of the time. So maybe this might just be a stereotypical 2, not a 2.5, probably just a 2. But 5 mana 5/4 is going to be a solid body in a lot of decks, and you'll end up playing it a decent amount of the time, though 5-drops are probably not going to be that necessary. But I love the flavor text. I know I should be more concerned, but a big blue zombie potamus from beyond the stars, this is what they're invading us with. It's just so good. Such good flavor text. Next up we have Lazotep Reaver, and finally we're starting to get to the good ones. I have this as the number 5 black common. It's a 2-drop that comes in as a 1/2 and gets that amass rolling. At this stage of the game, when you're playing this on turn 2, is basically just going to be a 2 mana for a 1/2 and a 1/1, and that's just a very good card in limited. It'll give you good double blocks, it'll give you good defensive options, and then it'll give you a nice little base to start your amass from. Also, there are some minor sacrifice themes, ways to sacrifice creatures. There's one common that does it, and then there's a couple. I think there's an uncommon that does it as well. And it's just a good tool for sacrificing things. There's some cards in red, I think, as well, that let you sacrifice things. So Lazotep Reaver gives you a nice little body to sacrifice either the amassed token or the 1/2. And overall, this is just a very good creature in limited. If this was printed as just a 2 mana 1/2 that came with a 1/1 buddy, that card would be very good. And I think that on turn 2, that's what Lazotep Reaver is going to be. So I have it as the number 5 at black common. I think it's going to be a 3.0 card. I don't know why I keep saying 3.0. It's not like I do 3.25. I just do like 3s or 3.5 and stuff. Ob Nixilis' Cruelty. Speaking of good cards, I have this as the number 1 black common. This card is incredible. The only reason it beats Spark Harvest, which I'll get to, is because instant speed removal at 3 mana is a thing that you will never really have enough of, whereas Spark Harvest has diminishing returns and stuff. But Ob Nixilis' Cruelty is incredible. It exiles the creature. It's instant speed. It pretty much kills anything. -5/-5 is basically unconditional removal. And overall, it's just a card that I'm very happy to have almost any number of copies of. Maybe 6 copies would be too many, but I'd probably play 5 in my deck. It's just that good. Such a powerful card. I'd probably play 6. Yeah, this card is going to be a 4.0 card for a common. This card is unbelievable and definitely a card you should take early and play often. Very, very, very good card. Next up, we have Shriek Diver. Just a solid playable. Going to be a 3.0. 3 mana 2/1 flyer is like a little bit below rate, but the fact that it can gain haste in the later parts of the game is really good. It just gives it a nice little benefit for aggressive decks, and I think Shriek Diver is going to be a 3.0 card, just a solid playable. Next up, we have Sorin's Thirst. This is the card I have as the number 3 black common. 2 mana, deal 2 and gain 2. Just a very solid effect. Instant speed. It does cost double black, but oftentimes you're not going to be casting it on turn 2 anyway. I like the flavor of the card as well. Not that that affects my grading, but I see you're out of the wall. I was really like actually reading the storyline when that stuff was happening with Nahiri and Sorin, so I kind of like the flavor. And deal 2 damage, gain 2 life, instant speed. Sign me up. Great card. 3.0 rating for Sorin's Thirst, maybe even bumping up to 3.5 depending on how the creatures line up at the format, but I'm going to start out with 3.0. Next up we have Spark Harvest. This was the card I mentioned earlier. It's 1 black mana, but that's a little bit deceptive because a lot of the time you're not going to be sacrificing a creature to pay the extra cost, so it'll end up being 3 black as a cost. Destroy target creature or planeswalker. bam, you just beat them. You just killed their creature or planeswalker. The fact that this can hit planeswalkers is incredibly relevant in this set. The fact that it has the alternate mana cost of paying just 1 mana for it is also incredibly relevant. Can maybe let you do some really strong tempo plays later on in the game, or early on if you are a little bit mana screwed, you can use that as well. And overall, Spark Harvest is going to be a 4.0 as well, I believe. Maybe a 3.5 in like multiples, but the first copy is going to be really incredible for your deck. This card, unlike Obnixilus's Cruelty, gets worse in multiples because you can only afford to have so many 5-drops in a deck, but that is a partially made up for with the alternate mana cost, because you can cast this without having 5 mana, but you ideally want to cast it for 5 mana. Spark Harvest is just an incredible card. I think it and Obnixilus's Cruelty are going to be the number 1 and 2 black commons for pretty much everyone. It really does depend on what your deck needs. I think I would probably take... I don't even know. It's really hard to say which one's better, and I think I'm going to start off with Obnixilus's Cruelty a little bit better, but I could definitely see Spark Harvest being better. It's just that I don't really see killing Planeswalkers to be as huge of a deal, because the really scary ones are oftentimes at rare, but there's enough really good uncommon ones as well that I could see Spark Harvest just kicking Obnixilus's Cruelty out, but I guess we'll find out. They're both very, very good. This is a 4.0 card, 3.5 as the second copy. It's just a very, very, very good card, and I'm looking forward to playing with it. Next up, we have Spark Reaper. This card is solid. 3 mana, 2/3 is already like a decent body, and then having an extra activated ability, it can sacrifice itself. Gaining a life, it really does kind of help you stabilize a little bit in certain matchups, and drawing a card is really nice as well. So I think Spark Reaper is actually going to be a 3.0 card. The benefit of being able to sacrifice your smaller creatures that maybe come with a mass is really nice as well. So I think Spark Reaper is going to be an incredible card, not incredible, a good card in the format, a 3.0 card in the format, shall we say. 3 mana is quite a bit for the sacrifice ability, so it's not going to be unbelievably good, but 3 mana, 2/3 is already like a fine card, not insane, but adding on that extra ability really does repel it a bit. Tidebreaker Giant, I have this card also, actually I have this card at a 2.5, not a 3.0. 6 mana for a 4/5 is just a little bit below rate. The fact that it does replace itself is nice, but at that point in the game, drawing lands is basically like drawing a blank. So it's kind of like saying draw 1/3 of a card, draw 2/3 of a, draw half a card, because you'll have like roughly half land, half creatures potentially. I don't know exactly the numbers, but like if you have 17 lands, 23 spells, you'll draw like roughly half a card, because if you have, the thing is, if early in the game, say, if you play a 3-drop that draws a card, then all of the cards you draw are relevant, because you still want to be hitting land drops. But late in the game, you don't really want to be hitting land drops, so you're really only drawing like half of a card, if that makes sense. It's not perfectly mathematically accurate the way it works, but later on, cards that cantrip aren't as necessarily as good. If you have a lot of expensive cards and you want to keep hitting your land drops past land 6, then it definitely gets a little bit better. Tidebreaker Giant, though, is going to be a very solid card. 4/5 is a big body. A 5 mana 4/5 would be like solid, and adding that extra mana to draw a card, lose a life, is pretty relevant as well. So Tidebreaker Giant is definitely going to be a 2.5, maybe a 3.0 if the format's slow enough, because the body is big, and if the format's slow, you don't really get punished for playing too many 6-drops, but there is a 6-drop tax. You don't really want to have too many 6-drops in your deck, so I think I'm going to start off with this being a 2.5, a little bit below like the solid playables. Next up, the solid playables like Lazotep Heart Reaver. Next up, we have Toll of the Invasion. I'm going to start off with this card being unplayable. 3 mana discard effects generally are just not that great, and tacking on an Amass 1 is not going to make that change. If this, again, if Amass worked slightly differently, it might be a little bit better, but generally just putting a +1/+1 counter onto your army that's already relatively big is probably not going to make Toll of the Invasion that good. So yeah. Next up, we have Unlikely Aid. This was a card that I actually almost put at the top 5 commons over Lazotep Reaver, but the fact that Obnixilus's Cruelty kind of gets around this made me put it a little bit lower, and also the fact that there's like some instant speed removal that can kind of punish this. But Unlikely Aid is a very good combat trick. Giving creatures indestructible is always a little bit underrated. Historically, there have been cards that give like +1/+0 and indestructible, but +2/+0 indestructible, your creature's going to win that combat almost every time, and it's just a very good card. Unlikely Aid, definitely going to get a 3.0 rating from me. I generally tend to be a little bit higher on combat tricks than a lot of people, because I like the ability to outplay the opponent. Another thing with Unlikely Aid is that if they like have to triple block your big army, you can just give it indestructible and kind of wreck them. So I like Unlikely Aid quite a bit. Very high grade for a combat trick. Vampire Opportunist is next. This is the type of 2-drop that people really enjoy. 2 mana 2/1 that can then drain people in the late game. That being said, the activation is so expensive that it's realistically never going to happen in a game of Limited, so I'm not very high on this card. I'm going to give it a rating of 2, maybe even a little bit lower, 1.5. 7 mana is just so much mana. It's a nice little bit of upside, and that makes the card like marginally playable, but in many cases, it's going to be a 2 mana 2/1. So I'm going to give this card a 1.5, maybe a 2.0 rating. Next up, we have Vraska's Finisher. This is what I have as the number 4 black common. It is a little bit switchable with Lazotep Reaver, though. But it is a tier below Soren's Thirst. That's why grading scales are a little bit tricky, because I gave Soren's Thirst a 3.0, I gave Lazotep Reaver a 3.0, and I'm going to give Vraska's Finisher a 3.0, but they're all like definitely a little bit different from each other. I definitely would pick Soren's Thirst over both of the other ones, though the Vraska's Finisher and Lazotep Reaver are pretty close. Vraska's Finisher, this card reminds me of Fathom Fleet Cutthroat from back in Ixalan block. But it's only 3 mana. It's a 3 mana 3/2, which is already like fine. Like that would be a 2.0, and the extra ability is really quite nice, because then you can just kind of suicide your creatures in it and know that those creatures will essentially have Death Touch for the turn, and you're playing a reasonably sized body. So Vraska's Finisher, definitely going to be a solid card. I'm going to give it a 3.0 rating. Now let's move on to some. Just make double check I didn't miss any cards. I missed a card in my white review, and I felt kind of bad about it. Next up, we're going to be looking at the uncommons. Bleeding Edge, yet another removal spell for black. Up to 1, the creature, I'll zoom in on it. The creature gets -2/-2, so it's not a huge removal spell, but then you amass 2. So that's actually kind of nice. You add some counters to your creature, kill their creature. It does cost double black, but I think Bleeding Edge is going to be a solid 3.0. If you can kill a creature and put some counters onto your army, it's actually going to be a really big deal. Imagine if you had a 3 mana creature, like a 3 mana 2/2 that gave a creature -2/-2 when it entered the battlefield. That's a very good card, and Bleeding Edge doesn't quite do that, but that's kind of how I think about a lot of amass cards, is slightly worse than their creature equivalent. Though in some cases maybe you want to be putting counters on one big creature, so you never know. Bleeding Edge is definitely a card. I think it's going to be a 3.0 rating for that one. Next up, we have Bond of Revival. This is representing the bond of Rakdos and Rakdos and Golgari. Geez, how did I? Yeah, they both have black in common. I was like, that's not Orzhov. Orzhov bonds with Azorius in the bond of whatever the heck it's called. But Bond of Revival is like a raised dead that also gives the creature haste. So it's like the best raised dead we've ever seen. Even though the best raised dead, and by raised dead I mean 5 mana, bring a creature back to life card. Giving it haste is really nice, and I initially thought that you would have to sacrifice the creature at the end of your turn, but you don't. It just comes back and stays. So this card's going to get a 3.0 rating from me. I actually think it's significantly better than raised dead. Giving it haste is a relatively significant effect. I guess raised dead doesn't target creatures in only your graveyard. You can bring creatures from other graveyards too, but Bond of Revival, that does ding it down a little bit. Sorry about that. I misread the card initially. I'm going to give it a 2.0 rating in light of that. Still a very solid card, like playable card, but generally not going to be as strong, because you can't just kill their big creature and then reanimate it. Yeah, that's a little bit of a letdown. Rats, I was kind of hoping it'd be a little bit better than that. Well, 2.0, it'll still see some play, and I love the flavor of all of the bonds. The flavor text. Today we throw off the yoke of death. Either this is an affirmation of the eternal cyclical nature of life, or it's just hilarious. Depends on which one of us you ask. I just love that type of bond revival. I love the whole bond cycle. Next up, we have Davriel Rogue Shadow Mage. Now, I have this card at a 3.0, just a solid card. It isn't that easy to defend, but 3 mana, if you can activate it twice, it's really good. If you can activate it 3 times, it's really good. But it's not that easy to defend. If you're playing it on turn 3, they might just have a creature and kill it. So it'll be like a 3 mana, make them discard and soak up some damage. It does, yeah. I see the play pattern for this either being to play this on turn 3 when your opponent is stumbling a little bit, in which case it's incredible. If your opponent is going first, this card gets a lot worse. And also in the late game, you might have a board stall, in which case you just get them down, discard a couple cards, and then they can never really hold cards in hand. So, I'll bump Davriel up to a 3.5. I think the card is going to be pretty solid, and gives you a nice little bit of damage extra to the opponent's face in late game board stall. So Davriel gets a 3.5 from me. Yeah, not quite a 4.0. It's not as insane. I think I would still take Obnixilus's Cruelty over it to start with, just because efficient removal is so good. But Davriel Rogue Shadow Mage is definitely a card that I will be keeping my eye on. Next up, we have Dreadmalkin, another sacrifice outlet for things. 1 mana, 1/1 Menace, not a good enough card in Limited, but if you add the ability to sacrifice another creature to put counters on Dreadmalkin, it might actually get there, especially because you can sacrifice at instant speed. It could make combat a nightmare for the opponent. It really is hard to block, and there is Proliferate in the set, so keep that in mind. I think Dreadmalkin is actually going to be a 2.5. Generally, this type of effect would not be good enough, but because Proliferate's in the set, I'm going to be a little bit higher on Dreadmalkin. And also, I think you're going to be wanting to sacrifice your amass tokens sometimes. You'll have like a 1/1 army token, and then you'll just want to get rid of it so you can start making more creatures with them. Because the fact that you can yeah, sacrifice your army when they're small and then make a new army. Stuff like that is just going to be generally good for Dreadmalkin. So I'm going to start off with Dreadmalkin being a 2.5, though I'm definitely willing to move that down. I think 2.5 is about its peak level of performance, probably. Eternal Taskmaster gets a grade of 2.5 from me. It is a 2-mana 2/3, which is already good enough. I mean, it does enter the battlefield tapped, which is a bit of downside, but it has extra upside in the fact that you can pay 3 to just essentially draw a card when it attacks, which is insane. So Eternal Taskmaster gets a 3.5 from me. Definitely a very good uncommon. Black really has almost no misses in the uncommon slot. Just all the uncommons are pretty good. So I'm pretty happy with the way Eternal Taskmaster looks for limited. It's good on turn 2. It's good later in the game because you can buy back your best creature. It's just a good card. Next up, we have Liliana's Triumph. Each opponent sacrifices a creature, and if you control a Liliana Planeswalker, they discard a card. So the Liliana part never comes up, but the sacrifice ability is going to be relevant. It is instant speed. You can generally kill some pretty big creatures with this. One important thing to note is that since this is a set that really wants to emphasize the importance of armies, there are no like pacifism effects. So your opponent's not going to be sitting there with a creature that has an enchantment removal spell on it, unless of course you turned it into a frog with whatever her name is. Transmutation. I know on my set review I wrote transformation, which was incorrect. It turns the creature into a 1/1 frog, so they maybe get to sacrifice that creature if you're playing specifically blue-black and you're pairing those cards together in the same deck, which is probably not advisable, but in most other scenarios you're going to nab a real card with this, unless of course they're also making armies. So I think it's more of a sideboard card than a main deck card. Edict effects like this, which is when you make opponent sacrifice a creature, generally tend to be more of a sideboard card because you don't want to like just have their opponent sacrifice their random 1/2 from Lazotep Reaver, that type of thing, but in the right matchups, it's definitely going to do great work. Next up, we have Ob Nixilis the Hate Twisted. Now, this card I'm actually very high on, and I think that might be strange to people because this card like is inherently card disadvantage a lot of the time, because when you kill their creature, they draw 2 cards. But that being said, you don't have to use Ob Nixilis to kill like minor creatures. You use it to kill the important creatures. And so I think this card is actually going to be a 3.5. It's a kind of aggressive rating. I'm going to start off pretty high on Ob Nixilis the Hate Twisted because first of all, it really does add up if your opponent's drawing a card and taking damage. That's kind of scary. So on board stalls, this card is fearsome. And also on board stalls, the opponent, a lot of the cards in the later stages of the game are not as relevant to draw. If you kill their 6-drop creature, they only have room for so many 6-drops in their deck. They only have room for so many relevant creature threats in their deck. And if you just kill their creature, them drawing 2 cards is not that much of a downside, because especially because they're taking 2 damage. So you kill their creature, they draw 2 cards, they lose 2 life, and essentially, especially like, and their opponent's just in not a great shape. If you're playing an aggressive deck, Ob Nixilis gets even better, because just imagine the scenario. Your opponent you've been playing an aggressive curve out. They play their 4-drop creature. You have curved out into Ob Nixilis. You play your 5-drop Ob Nixilis. You -2 on their guy. They draw 2 cards, lose 2 life. So immediately you've gotten rid of the blocker. You swing in for like 4. Say they go then, like they're at like 8 life, say. Then they lose a life from drawing a card. They go to 7. And they play their creature. You kill it. And they're just like completely dead. I think Ob Nixilis the Hate Twisted is going to be a 3.5, maybe even a 4.0, though that depends. If you're in an aggressive deck, Ob Nixilis gets better, and if you're in a control deck, Ob Nixilis gets a little bit worse because you can't protect him. But Ob Nixilis is going to be a good card. Count on it. I think I'm pretty confident in that fact. Next up, we have Price of Betrayal. This is a card that I think is more of a sideboard card for if you see your opponent playing with Planeswalkers, because that are like kind of scary to you, or that you're kind of worried about. Because Price of Betrayal is essentially a 1-mana kill a Planeswalker, because most Planeswalkers aren't going to have more than 5 loyalty counters. It also has minor utility against proliferated creatures, like a creature that has like 6 counters on it. Maybe it might be kind of scary. But Price of Betrayal is basically a sideboard card for Planeswalkers. As such, it will get a grade of 1.0 in the main deck, but kind of a 3.0 sideboard card, because it's a very solid sideboard card. Next up, we have the final uncommon for black, Vizier of the Scorpion. I love this card. 3-mana 1/1 that amasses 1. So it's a 1/1, and it also gives your zombies Death Touch. So like you're basically making a 1/1 Death Touch creature, and then every other amass card you make also makes the creature with Death Touch. So this just essentially means that you can never be attacked, because your opponent's going to assume you have more amass stuff in your deck. So every time they attack you, you're trading off your 1/1 and for their creature, and then you're just getting to make a new 1/1 the next turn with whatever amass card you have, and it has Death Touch, so it trades with anything, and it's just, this card is going to be incredible. I have this at 3.5, maybe a 4.0 even. This card is going to be very good. Also, if your opponent's in the late game trying to triple block your like big army token, they're not going to have great blocks because you're just going to have a death touch creature. So all the guys blocking it are going to die anyway. If you combine that with any combat trick, it's just completely brutal. And overall, Vizier of the Scorpion is going to be an incredible card. Definitely going to give that a 3.5/4.0 rating. It's funny because I keep on just comparing all these cards to Ob Nixilis' Cruelty, and I'm actually not sure which one I would take. I'm probably just going to give Vizier of the Scorpion a 4.0 because I think I might take that over Ob Nixilis' Cruelty. I think giving your zombie tokens Death Touch is going to be really nice, especially because there's also just some random zombies running around. Though this only affects zombie tokens, so maybe all the stuff I was saying about random zombies doesn't necessarily matter. But yeah, Vizier of the Scorpion is going to be a good card. In the set, probably going to give that a 3.5 or 4.0 rating. Though, I guess I should choose. If I had to take this pack one, pick one between this and Ob Nixilis' Cruelty. Early on in the format, I'm going to default towards the Cruelty, but I could definitely see Vizier of the Scorpion being correct. Yeah, because removal is just so good. Though the fact that there's so much removal makes Ob Nixilis' Cruelty a little bit worse, but yeah. Okay, now we're getting onto the rares. The black cards actually got an extra rare in this set. They stole it from green. That's right. I did the counting. I looked at the cards. I've never like looked at this type of thing before, but like the black cards definitely took a rare from green because all the other colors have like 8 rares, and then black has 9 and green has 7. So the green got screwed in the rares department. But there are some sweet black rares, so I'm pretty excited to talk about them. Anyway, Bolas' Citadel is going to be a great card. Basically, you can draw like infinite cards with this at the price of losing a lot of life. If you do have a card like Bolas' Citadel in your deck, you're going to want to prioritize life gain cards, but so that you can use this the most effectively and just draw infinite cards. But this card is going to be like a 5, I think. It's just the fact that you can just cast cards off the top of your deck without paying for their mana cost is just incredible. You're going to want to have a deck that doesn't lose a lot of life early, but if you get to the late game with like 15 life, you're just going to win the game. So Bolas' Citadel going to be a 5.0 card. This card is incredible. It's also going to be incredibly fun. You're just going to go boom, 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 boom. I'm at 5 life. I'll stop playing cards, but it's also cool. The second ability is also kind of cool. If anyone uses the second ability, sacrifice 10 land permanents to kill their opponent, just send me a screenshot. That's going to be sweet. Next up, we have Command the Dreadhorde. Another incredible, another good black rare. You can just pretty much reanimate whatever the heck you want and then pay life. So this card also incentivizes you to build a defensive deck, maybe put some life gain in there. But if you do get there, you can just reanimate like 5 creatures and go to town. I think this card is going to be really nice. Even just reanimating a couple of smaller creatures is going to be really good. Though you have to keep in mind that to reanimate 2 3-drops costs 6 life. So it's not going to be like quite as powerful as other effects might be. So I'm going to give this card a 4.0 rating. I think you're going to be able to get enough value out of this, enough mileage, and you're going to be able to construct your deck in such a way that you're going to be able to maximize its effect. It's a very powerful card, and I think it's a rare worth building around. Next up, we have it. Definitely trade more often when you have that. Next up, you have Deliver Unto Evil. Not a huge fan of Deliver Unto Evil relative to other cards. The fact that your opponent gets to give you like the worst 2 cards in your graveyard is like not great, because a lot of the time you're going to have a couple of like janky 2-drops in your graveyard and then a couple of actually good cards, and your opponent's never going to have to give you the good cards. So, and if you have a Bolas Planeswalker, then you're going to be in good shape anyway, because the Bolas Planeswalker is unbelievably powerful and limited. So if you ever cast that, you just win. So I think Deliver Unto Evil is going to be a 2.0 card. You're not really going to want to have to play this. It's also kind of tricky to get 4 cards into your graveyard in a lot of situations, so not a huge fan of Deliver Unto Evil. Not the greatest rare, though black does have its fair share of rare, so it can have its own couple duds if it needs to. Next up, we have Dreadhorde Invasion. This card has been compared to Bitter Blossom, which is a very, very powerful rare, and Dreadhorde Invasion is no Bitter Blossom, but it is quite a strong rare. Just letting you amass every turn means that you're going to have a zombie army every turn. You can really build your deck around this and put some more sacrifice effects in there. You can also just go like play other amass cards and get it up to that 6 power quicker, and then you have a lifelinker, massive army, and even if they kill it, you can just start building again. Dreadhorde Invasion is going to be a very strong card. Definitely going to rate that at a 4.0 rating. It's a very, 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 I keep saying very, it's a good card. I think I would probably take this over Ob Nixilis' Cruelty. Pack one, pick one. That's like kind of the standard I've set for myself. Next up, we have Finale of Eternity. This card is really good. If you cast this for 6 mana, you just win the game, because it's like a one-sided board wipe. You kill their biggest 3 creatures, and you don't lose anything, and then you just win the game. So Finale of Eternity is a 5.0 card. Yeah, just killing 3 creatures. They're never going to have more than 3 relevant creatures. If they have more than 3 relevant creatures, then you've already lost the game. So I think that Finale of Eternity is going to be an incredible card. Definitely a first pick, a 5.0 card. And if you ever cast it for more than 6 mana, like X equals 4 is usually probably like the spot you're going to want to go. But if you have to kill a thing with X equals 7, then you can just sometimes you even wait to do that. It's going to be a very good card. Next up, we have God Eternal Bantu, another card that I'm going to be rating a 5.0. It's just 5 mana 5/6 is good with Menace, and then you can just get infinite value because you can start sacrificing your lands. So in the late game, you draw this, you draw like 4 cards, and then even if it dies, you just get it back. It's just unbelievable. God Eternal Bantu, 5-point rating. It's maybe yeah, it's a disgustingly powerful card. It's either a 5.0 or a 4.5. It might not be quite as good as some of the others. The thing with 5.0 cards is after a certain point, like, it's semantics. Like, certain 5.0s are better than other 5.0s. Like, I think I'd rather have God Eternal Oketra than this one. Probably. I'm not 100% sure. They're both disgustingly powerful, of course, but yeah, I'm probably just going to give God Eternal Bantu a 5.0. It's just so good. And it's impossible to kill, so that's an added benefit of God Eternal Bantu. And if they kill it, you get its value again. So, I'll probably, maybe it's not as good if you're behind, so I'll give this a 4.5. I'll give it a little bit of a notch down, especially considering we've seen so many, like, insane rares in this set. Basically, the thing you should be getting is that these rares are insane. Liliana Dreadhorde General is also a 5.0 card. This is probably the best, maybe the best rare in the set for limited. It comes in with six loyalty, and you can either put it up to 7 loyalty and make a 2/2, that if it dies, you draw a card, or you can make each player sacrifice 2 creatures. If you're sacrificing 2 creatures, you're then drawing 2 cards. If they're sacrificing 2 creatures, they get nothing. So you just completely come in, kill all their creatures, and then you have a planeswalker left around that makes a 2/2 every turn. If any of your creatures die, you draw a card. This card is absolutely insane. It's unbelievable. Definitely, I think it's probably just this like competes with NicolaiBolas for like powerfulness, and it's one color. Like, NicolaiBolas is like disgustingly powerful, but like this card is also disgustingly powerful. It's unbelievable. This card in limited is going to win every game you play it pretty much. If you ever beat Liliana Dreadhorde General, you're gonna feel like you did like something unbelievable. You're gonna like your opponent's gonna play Liliana Dreadhorde General -4 it, and then you're gonna Spark Harvest it on your next turn, and you're still gonna lose the game. It's just, yeah, disgustingly powerful. Very, very good rare. So it's like Black got all of these unbelievable rares. Those are like 5, 5, 4. This card's kind of a dud, but 5, like 4.5, 5. Massacre Girl, another very good rare. I'm actually really looking forward to seeing how this plays out because they're going to make some weird attack. You're going to have to go deep in the tank and be like, well, if they have Massacre Girl, I lose my entire board. It's funny. I normally don't mention like Hearthstone, but this card is basically exactly, shoot, what's that card called in Hearthstone? Defile. I just imagining the animation on Arena is going to be sweet. 5 mana 4/4 that just kills like a bunch of creatures if you can set it up is going to be really cool. It does kill your own creatures, but I think it's going to be sweet when you can pull off a sweet Massacre Girl turn. I'm going to give this card a 4.5. It's going to do good work. I'm going to give it a 4.0 actually. It's going to do good work, but it's going to be kind of tricky to set up, and it's not always going to do a ton of stuff. So yeah, I think the upside makes it worth giving it a 4.0 rating. If you have like if there's like a 2/2 and a 3/3 on the battlefield, it's just gonna kill everything, which is insane. But and that's not that hard to set up. But I think Massacre Girl is gonna probably be a 4.0 card. Definitely a strong one to keep in mind. Next up, we have the Elder Spell, which is finally a 1.0 card, unplayable and limited. Your opponent's not going to have enough planeswalkers for it to be relevant in most decks, though there will be some situations where you will bring it in out of the sideboard if your opponent has a particularly problematic planeswalker to deal with. You just don't want to have this card in your hand if your opponent doesn't have a planeswalker, and there will be decks frequently they don't have planeswalkers because they didn't see a good on-color one, or there wasn't a planeswalker that was any good that they saw, or things like that. But I think the Elder Spell is not going to be main deckable, but definitely a sideboard card, so probably like the similar deal to the other planeswalker removal uncommon. A 1.0 card in the main deck and a 3.0 card in the sideboard, though maybe there could be situations where you would main deck this type of card, depending on how the format shapes up. I just don't really see that as something I would want to be doing, especially early on in the format, before you really know how good the planeswalkers will be. Anyway, that is going to do it for the black cards of the set. Definitely a nice little change of pace. These cards are unbelievable. I think black might just be the best color in the set as a result of this, but that's just what I think. What do you think? Let me know in the comment section down below by leaving a comment. Leave a comment also with which color you want to see me review next. Hit that thumbs up button to support future set reviews. Remember, we're trying to get to 50 thumbs up. And also subscribe to the channel to join us on our set review journey and also through our War of the Spark drafts and sealed events. So do all of those things. Let me know, but you made it all the way to the end of this video by saying hashtag war black. Say no, hashtag black is OP in the comment section down below, and I will talk to you in my next video. Thanks so much for watching.